Last Winter's Snowman, a snowy story from the Gaspé Coast. Chapter 6, The Hollow Tree. The little dog jumped, barked, pulled on her scarf, and ran around Maggie's feet, forcing her to walk across the bridge. Further and further she followed Tippy into the woods. She knew that she should turn back, because she was too far from home, but Tippy kept running ahead of her across the open fields. She finally stopped in front of the biggest tree that she had ever seen. It had a big opening in front of it, and she remembered her neighbor, Mr. Wilson, talking about a big tree in the woods across the brook. He had called it the Hollow Tree and said it was the biggest tree that he had ever seen, and that several people could walk inside of it at the same time. He told Maggie's story about the people who had camped out in it during storms and the many travelers who used to use it as a place to stay for the night. Maggie figured that this must be it because it was much bigger than all the other trees around it. Even though she was afraid, she followed Tippy inside the tree because she did not want to lose her best friend. Once inside the tree, she could see the glimmers of light pouring in through the small holes above her head that the birds must have made to enter it. At ground level, it was dark, and she tried to adjust her eyes to the inside walls of the big tree. She could see that Tippy was sniffing at something and wagging her tail. She got scared and tried calling her, but as usual, the little dog didn't listen. She took a few steps forward to try and pick her up, when she came face to face with the most unbelievable thing she had ever seen. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out of her mouth. She wanted to run, but she couldn't move because standing right in front of her was a real snowman. She began to shiver and covered her eyes with her mittens, hoping that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. Yet when she looked again, he was still standing right in front of her. The snowman seemed afraid and looked as if he was trying to hide from her in the dimly lit tree. His eyes looked sad, and he seemed to be trembling. They both stood facing each other in the silence, and Maggie began to feel sorry for him. "Don't be afraid, Mr. Snowman," she whispered. Maggie took another step towards him. She introduced herself and assured him that he had no reason to be afraid of her, because she was just a little girl who had never heard a snowman. She slowly reached out and touched his cold cheeks. As she looked at him more closely, she thought that she could see tiny tears in his eyes. Could a snowman cry, she wondered? No, it had to be her imagination, because she knew that snowmen were not real people, for they were only made from big balls of packed snow. Yet there seemed to be a person inside of his cold exterior. Maggie's mother had always told her that she had too much of an imagination, and that one day it would get her into trouble. She knew that it was impossible to be standing inside a tree talking to a snowman when it had not snowed all winter. Then the snowman turned his head and looked down at her, and she knew that it wasn't her imagination. She bravely looked up at him and asked, "Who are you and where did you come from? Because we don't have any snow." The snowman smiled, and his eyes seemed to twinkle, and he began to tell Maggie his story. This snowy story from the Gaspé Coast will continue with Chapter 7, called The Snowman's Story. And in that chapter, you're going to get to meet the snowman, find out who he is, and find out why he was living in a tree in the woods during a winter when there wasn't any snow. Until then, enjoy the snowflakes.